start off this list by saying that today's wealthiest people aren't even on this list. Even though Jeff Bezos could have been a part of it, he didn't maintain his $200 billion, so he's out. On top of that, just know that Mansa Musa is not the wealthiest person on this list. He's actually number 5. So without further ado, here are the top 15 richest people in history. Let's dive right into it, shall we? Number 15. Cornelius Vanderbilt. Net worth $185 billion. He's the business magnate that started off working with his father on their family business. Quickly noticing the opportunities around him, he started getting into the shipping as well as the railroad business. Known as the Commodore, he became famous for owning the New York Central Railroad. Some say he was too competitive and destructive, but others only remember him as honorable, shrewd, and hardworking. Number 14. Henry Ford. Net worth $188 to $199 billion. He's the man that built one of the most successful car manufacturing companies in the world. The Ford Motor Company was the vehicle that brought Henry Ford all of his wealth and the exorbitant net worth. He created the famous Ford Model T car, of which he managed to sell about 15 million models while the model was in production. He also invented mass production with the conveyor belt system, the tri-motor engine, and the $5 wage. Number 13. Moammar Gaddafi. Net worth $200 billion. He was definitely one of the most controversial political figures of our time. He was the leader of Libya for 42 years, which made him the longest non-royal ruler of the country. Even though no official figures are released, some estimates believe that Gaddafi had a net worth of $200 billion. At one point, there was a figure that said he was worth something like $70 billion, but we can never know for sure. Number 12. Basil II. Net worth $200 billion. They called him the Bulgar Slayer because he smashed that like button if you haven't done so already. But no, they gave him that name because Basil II fought incessant battles with King Samuel. He had every single Bulgarian blinded and sent them back to their king. Because he was a savvy tactician, he ruled the empire for 50 years without a problem. Number 11. Mir Osman Ali Khan. Net worth $210 billion. He was the last ruler of the princely state of Hyderabad. The Nizam was so wealthy that he was even featured on the cover of Time in 1937 as one of the wealthiest individuals of all time. He built numerous mosques and schools in his city. It is said that he owned the 5th largest diamond in the entire world, and instead of using it as jewelry, he used it as a paperweight in his office. Number 10. William the Conqueror. Net worth $230 billion. He was one of the most famous kings of England who was born in 1028. He was the first Norman king of England who took the throne for himself. He attacked Harold Godwin, who was named successor of the throne instead of him. He conquered new territories as he pleased and then distributed the property to his Norman followers. Number 9. Nicholas II of Russia. Net worth $300 billion. He was rich, but boy was he incompetent. He was the last Tsar of Russia, who died in 1918. He inherited all of the wealth from his father and focused on maintaining the status quo in Europe. He didn't embrace the change that was happening around him. He turned Russia from a global superpower into an economic disaster and a military catastrophe. That's why the only project he ever finished was the Trans-Siberian Railroad. Number 8. Andrew Carnegie. Net worth $310 billion. He was a man small in stature, but had one of the greatest business minds of all time. He was a Scottish immigrant that came to the States and became one of the wealthiest people in America at the time. And now he's even considered the wealthiest man in history. He was an industrialist that was at the vanguard of the steel industry in the States. Aside from being a wealthy man, he was also one of the biggest philanthropists of all time. In the last 18 years of his life, the man gave $350 million of his money to charities and universities. Number 7. John D Rockefeller. Net worth $350 to $420 billion. Even though many consider him the richest man in modern history, he's far from the richest man to have ever lived. At the age of 20, the young John went into several business partnerships into oil refining. After getting more experience, he founded Standard Oil Company in 1870, which at its peak controlled 90% of all oil in the United States. Because of his monopolistic practices, Standard Oil was regarded as an octopus that had spread its tentacles through the entire economy, as well as the White House. After all, he did own 2% of the US economy in 1913. Number 6. Jacob Fugger. Net worth $400 billion. There's some debate as to who was wealthier, John D. or Jacob Fugger, but since John's wealth has a wider range, we've decided to place him lower than Jacob Fugger. But who was this man? He was one of the richest German merchants that lived from 1459 until 1525. Seeing how mining was a profitable endeavor at the time, he became intrinsically involved in the mining industry, and then opened a bank that operated across all of Europe. Number 5. Mansa Musa. Net worth, low estimate, $400 billion. He was the emperor of the Mali Empire during the 14th century. While all of Europe was struggling, Mansa Musa was the king of gold in Africa. The continent was thriving. His entire country was covered in gold. In fact, it is said that he led a caravan of 60,000 people when making his pilgrimage to Mecca. There were thousands of camels, each carrying immeasurable amounts of gold. Number 4. Genghis Khan. Net worth $1 trillion. We've all heard of Genghis Khan. He's the ruthless Mongolian emperor that ruled almost all of Asia. The empire was so vast that its territory was spanning from the eastern coasts of Asia all the way to Poland. And with an empire that big comes about $1 trillion of net worth. Number 3. King Solomon. Net worth $2.2 trillion. If the name sounds familiar, that's because you've probably heard him mentioned in the Bible. He was one of the most successful kings of Israel and one of the 48 prophets. But his sanctity could also be measured in gold. He received 25 tons of gold for every one of the 39 years of his rule. Couple that with the taxes and conquests, and you have a net worth that equals $2.2 trillion. Number 2. Emperor Shenzhong of Song. Net worth 30% of the world's GDP. Heading one of the most powerful dynasties of the 11th century, it's no wonder that the emperor was that wealthy. The empire possessed 30% of the world's wealth at the time, but because this was the wealth of the entire kingdom, we can't really say with certainty how much money he had. So we'll safely assume it's somewhere between 2.2 trillion and 4.6 trillion. Number 1. Augustus Caesar. Net worth $4.6 trillion. No one questions the power of the Roman Empire. Augustus Caesar was a fierce emperor, and he was a ruthless warrior. Records say that he owned 1/5 of the wealth of his empire. Judging based on that, we can safely say that 1/5 of the country that produces 30% of the world's GDP at the time is about $4.6 trillion. On a related note, we wanted to know if you think any of the businessmen today will surpass the business tycoons of the industrial age. You can tell us in the comment section below. If you'd like more videos like these, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss any of them. And as always, thanks for watching, guys.